All right, so hi everyone. Our presentation is based on an article we read about the new write-down regulations for lenders as a result of COVID-19. My partner and I, Dave Metz, and I am Victor Liu.
So before I got into the current issue, I wanted to just talk about what write-downs were for the lenders, and so it has to do with the impaired assets. So an impaired asset's an asset that has a market value that's less than the value that's listed on the company's balance sheet. And so when an asset's deemed to be impaired, it has to be written down to reflect accurately for shareholders or investors or anyone who would be reasonably looking at the financial information for a company. And so that brings me to the actual issue that was posed in the article that we read about the new regulations. And so the issue was the old regulation, which was IAS 39. And so the old regulation.
I think we lost Victor.
Oh no.
He'll come back in, and I'll edit this out. There's no problem.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So just start over. This is for international accounting standards.
Right, yeah. So for International Accounting Standards 39, this is the old regulation. It allowed delayed write-downs, and so in the past this caused some uncertainty about the true state of the banks because they weren't able to afford to write down or write off some of their bad debt without becoming insolvent. So banks would do anything they could to prolong that process, claiming they would grow out of the problem. And which brings me to my next point, which banks would impairment's only recognized and written down when it's deemed permanent. So banks would try to prolong it by saying they're only temporary, and they would do so by and in doing so they would mislead investors with some unreliable financial information.
Okay, so they said it's not bad until it's really bad. It's totally dead.
Right, exactly, and that's why it was an issue with this old standard, because banks could just kind of sneakily weasel their way around writing down the true amounts that were reflective of the actual values.
Okay.
And so that brings me, and also this last point here, which was interesting. In 2008, U.S. banks wrote down more than $25 billion in goodwill from acquisitions, which actually weren't worth their purchase price. And so it became a game of banks kind of just misleading investors and anyone who would reasonably be looking at the financial info.
Okay.
Right, so the purpose of IAS 39 is that it establishes the principles for recognizing and measuring financial assets, financial liabilities, and some contracts of better self, not financial items. It also prescribes principles for derecognizing financial instruments. The recognition is when the entity becomes a party to the financial instrument contract, and the recognition of financial assets occurs when contractual rights to the asset's cash flows expire or when it has transferred the asset and substantially all the risks and rewards of ownership. Meanwhile, the recognition of financial liability is when obligation is extinguished. So that would be when it has been paid off or it's been forfeited. Not by default. There you go.
And so that brings us to the proposed change in accounting. That's what to solve that the issue that we've been talking about, IAS 39. So IFRS 9 is the new accounting change that's actually making banks write down loans earlier as risk outlooks change. And so although it's not a new thing, it was brought out in 2008 after the financial crisis. And so it's been used in Europe and Britain and over 100 other countries. And so as financial users, we have to be able to use
We lost you there for a minute, so if you could go back, Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just for the beginning of the slide?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So IFRS 9 was the proposed solution to the issue that we were just discussing, IAS 39, the old standard. And so IFRS 9 is a new standard. It's an accounting change that's forcing banks to write down the loans earlier as soon as risk outlooks change. And so
then if I get that, so you're saying that as the risk outlook changes, they write the loan down sooner than they would have under the old rule.
So yeah, so under IFRS 9, as risk heightens, so like right now we're in like a heightened risk market due to Corona, they're being forced to write them down earlier so that it could accurately reflect the true market value for people who would be looking at the financial information.
Okay.
Was my understanding.
Okay.
So yeah, I think the main point for that one was just it was designed to give an updated view of the credit risk in times of crisis, and so that's why I think they're mainly looking at it in today's time right now because we're going through what most would consider as a severe.
So then, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So why the change from IAS 39 to IFRS 9? IAS 39 seemed to be too complex and inconsistent, and it also deferred the recognition of credit losses on loans and receivables until too late in the credit cycle. FASB wanted to have this amendment for a long time, but the 2009 financial crisis made this change a priority.
And so these last two slides just kind of outline the difference between the current US GAAP and the new IFRS standard that we just went through. And I think actually our last slide says.
Oh, can you go back one? Can you just go back a little bit?
Sorry.
Okay.
This slide?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, this slide and the last slide both are just it's the comparison of the US GAAP and IFRS, and I think the most important part was that under the new standard, it allows immediate full or partial reversals of previously recognized losses. And I think it's interesting just because it's taking more into account the risk outlooks as like an estimate rather than like a flat initial and like designated credit loss like that the older that GAAP used to require.
Okay.
And so I think during times of crisis and especially now, the new IFRS 9 regulation makes a lot of sense.
So I mean, they're almost going through like you're going through and coming up with assumptions for your company. A bank would have to go through and do the same thing to evaluate the credit to a company that's like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. And you obviously use a different set of assumptions.
Yep. Yeah.
You might have a year ago. Okay.
Yeah, and so this last slide it kind of just plays off of the one prior. I just thought the PwC said it pretty nicely. If you could see in the at a glance paragraph, the last sentence in the first paragraph, it says, subsequently, if there's a significant increase in credit risk, the entire lifetime of credit loss is recognized. And so I think that's just like the most important takeaway for the IFRS 9. As your risk increases, your credit loss, or you're going to have to start writing down the true market value for the financial data.
Now, can you mark it back up under IFRS?
I think it could be a reversal, yeah, but under GAAP you can't.
Okay. Now, it would seem to me that based on where we are with the crisis now, if you're reporting on IFRS, you will be showing a lot more loss this year.
Yep, I would agree.
Now, will there still be losses under GAAP? Or will if I'm the same company looking at IFRS or GAAP, which one do you think is going to provide result in the greatest loss?
I still think GAAP is going to result in a greater loss just because it takes into account the entire lifetime at inception, as opposed to IFRS, which is it takes into account the risk like as the company or as the risk grows or deflates.
Okay.
So I think overall GAAP would still it would show a greater decrease.
Okay. What did you learn about yourself or anything from doing this activity?
To be honest, I really didn't really know a lot about impairment or write-down costs to begin with. I know I'm an accounting major and I've taken a lot of accounting classes, but it was just interesting to learn how banks and lenders kind of handled that during times of crisis.
Yeah, that is going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
I think I learned where to look for information because the article didn't tell me much other than there was a change. So I had to do some research for myself.